I'm going to start tonight by reading to you a short section from Teach Like a Champion 2.0, which is the revised version of my book. And I don't usually read. In fact, I've never read at a presentation. I'm a little bit embarrassed to for two reasons. First, because it always struck me as a little bit pretentious to read to a group of people. I mean, like, this ain't Shakespeare, let's be honest. But also, when I was a teacher, the administrator would often, my administrator would send an email out with 6 bullet points to all the teachers, and then he would call us to a meeting in which he would say, I sent you an email and it said, ba, 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 and he'd go through all the 6 points that he'd put in his email. And I always found myself thinking, why do I have to be here in a meeting if you sent me an email? In fact, like most teachers, I was smart enough to figure out this means I don't really have to read your emails. And I really want to encourage you to read the book. So with great caution, I'm going to read a little bit of it to you for a reason that I hope will become clear, and which this very strange first slide intimates. So this is the introduction, the art of teaching and its tools. Great teaching is an art. In the other arts, painting, sculpture, the writing of novels, great masters leverage a proficiency with basic tools to transform the rawest materials, stone, paper, ink, into the most valued assets in society. This alchemy is all the more astounding because the tools often appear unremarkable to others. Who would look at a chisel, a mallet, and a file and imagine them producing Michelangelo's David? Great art relies on the mastery and application of foundational skills learned through diligent study, craftsmanship, if you will. You learn to strike a chisel with a mallet and refine the skill with time, learning at what angle to strike the chisel and how tightly to hold it. Someday, perhaps years later, observers may assess the philosophy expressed by what you create. But far more important than any theory is your proficiency with the lowly chisel. True, not everyone who learns to drive a chisel will create a David, but neither can anyone who fails to master the tool do much more than make marks on rocks. Every artist, teachers included, is an artisan whose task is to study a set of tools and to unlock the secrets of their use. A chisel appears mundane, but the more you understand it, the more it guides you to see what's possible. Rounding a contour with unexpected smoothness, the chisel causes you to realize suddenly that you could bring added subtlety to a facial expression, more tension to the muscles of the figure you're sculpting, and this changes your vision for it. Mastery of tools does not just allow creation, it informs it. The process is often far from glamorous. An artist's life is a tradesman's life, really characterized by calluses and stone dust, requiring diligence and humility, but its rewards are immense. It's a worthy life's work. Traveling abroad during my junior year in college, I saw Picasso's school notebooks on display at the Picasso Museum in Barcelona. Now you know why I'm reading this. What I remember best are the sketches filling the margins of his pages. These weren't sketchbooks, mind you. These were notebooks, like those every student keeps of notes from lectures. The tiny sketches memorialized a teacher's face or Picasso's own hand grasping a pencil with perfect perspective, line, and shading. I had always thought Picasso's work was about abstraction, about a way of thinking that rendered the ability to draw accurately and realistically irrelevant. His sketches told another story, bearing witness to his mastery of fundamentals and constant drive to refine his skills. Even in the stray moments of his schooling, he was honing the building blocks of his technique. He was an artisan first, and then an artist, as the fact that he filled, by one account, 178 sketchbooks in his life further attests. So as you can see, I'm especially glad to be speaking in Barcelona tonight because it all started here. I want to start tonight by telling you a story. And this is a story about a hero. It takes place in Los Angeles, so we know that Los Angeles is the place that manufactures stories about heroes. But this is the hero of our story, and her name is Zenaida Tan. And no one in the room has ever heard of Zenaida Tan. And when I talk about her in the United States, no one has ever heard of her either. And I just want to, and the reason that she's interesting is because she was the feature in a story in the Los Angeles Times about 4 or 5 years ago. And she was featured because the Los Angeles Times found out that Los Angeles Unified School District, the government entity that runs all the schools in the city of Los Angeles, 10 million people, something like that, had data for 10 years or so about which teachers got what results with their students. And some teachers, it turned out, got 2 to 3 times the amount of growth every year in math and reading as the average student in the district. And no one had ever done anything with this data, and no one even knew who they were. But the Times got their hands on this data, and they went out to observe and interview these teachers. And one of these teachers was Zenaida Tan, who for 10 or 20 years had been achieving student achievement 2 to 3 times the average teacher in the district. So here's the Los Angeles Times story. Here's what they wrote about her. And I just want to tell you before I read a little segment of it to you that it's a scary story. So prepare yourself. Do you want to dim the lights or something? Just kidding. LA Unified School District has hundreds of teachers who, I'm reading from the article in the New York Times. LA Unified School District has hundreds of teachers who preside over remarkable successes year after year, often against incredible odds. But most are like Zenaida Tan, working in obscurity. No one asks them their secrets. Most of the time, no one even says, "Good job." Often, even their own colleagues and principals don't know who they are. Tan brims with effective ways to reach limited English students, handle discipline problems, and keep the kids engaged. "I do a lot of singing, games," she said. "It doesn't look like a lesson." But no one asks her for her advice. She says her fellow teachers at Morningside Elementary School consider her strict, even mean. She tends to keep to herself. "Nobody tells me that I'm a strong teacher," she says. That's okay by her. She adds, year after year, she watches her students make enormous progress and feels a quiet sense of satisfaction. By LAUSD's measure, Tan meets standard performance, that's her evaluation, as virtually all district teachers do. 3% of teachers in LA Unified District did not get this score in the year in question. Evaluators' only other option is below standard performance. On a recent evaluation, her principal checked off all the appropriate boxes, Tan said, then noted that she had been late to pick up her students from recess 3 times. "I threw it away because I got upset," Tan said. "Why don't you focus on my teaching? Why don't you focus on where my students are?" So you might be thinking, why is that such a scary story? But I actually think this is terrifying. To think that we have incredible assets in our classrooms, incredible skill in our classrooms, people who can coax 2 to 3 times the amount of learning out of a student as the average teacher, and yet the systems that we use to evaluate them, develop them professionally, all but drive them out of the system, number one. They fail to make her better. They fail to even make her feel valued. The most amazing thing about this is that she stayed after getting an evaluation like this. It's a happy accident that she's still doing the work that she does. Because they face difficult challenges and difficult problems in the classroom, and the solution to some of those problems is right down the hallway in Zenaida Tan's classroom, and no one ever walks down the hallway to walk into her classroom and say, wow, what could we learn from her? How could we share this among our teachers and ensure that more teachers are more successful? This idea of studying bright spots, which is the notion that success is more important than failure if you want to build organizational change, we stole from a book called Switch by Chip and Dan Heath, and if you like to read, I don't think it's been translated, but if you like to read in English, it's an incredibly tremendous book. It describes the history of organizational change and social change in different sectors of the economy. And so they make a bunch of really brilliant observations in this book. And one of them is that we assume that the size of a problem and the size of the solution have to be the same. If you have a big problem, you have to have a big, complex solution to fix it. But oftentimes, there are lots of examples of very simple solutions, making a lot of headway in solving complex problems. And so what they say, the way to learn those things, the way to learn what solutions have high leverage is to study success. We spend our time wringing our hands about the problems, but it's the solutions that are more powerful. And so, even here in Barcelona, There are hundreds of Zenaida Tans out there in your school system. Where are they? Who are they? Do you know? Have we studied them? Have we tried to learn from them? They're the incredible power of bright spots, right? If we found out what made them so successful, we could share that information, and that would be, you could argue, the fastest way to get better. And in fact, there are teachers every day like Zenaida Tan who achieve incredible results with high poverty kids, despite all the difficulties of those kids, and we have no idea who they are. So I cut data like this, and I went out to find as many of those classrooms in those schools as I possibly could, and I snuck into them when they would let me come visit them. And as soon as I went there, I thought, my God, this is incredible. I have to document this. And so I brought a video camera with me. And the very first videos that I shot, they look like terrible 1980s era wedding footage, you know, like the cameras like this. But what you see in that footage is incredible. And in fact, I still remember the moment when I saw a teacher do something that I had never seen a teacher do before in a classroom. And 2 weeks later, I was taping in a school 300 miles away, and I saw a teacher do the same thing. And I thought, you know, there are things that they do that are different. And so I set out to try and describe what those things are. What do the highest performing teachers do that makes them different from the merely good? And those are the things that I tried to describe and Teach Like a Champion. One of the things that strikes me, that what are the things that they have solutions to? It's a combination of what I would say the sublime and the mundane. There is incredible genius in the classroom of great teachers, and there are very simple things that they do very well that are often beneath the threshold of narration. We don't even think that they're talking about them. And this reminds me that there are two types of problems, challenges that you face in a classroom as a teacher. There are exotic problems and endemic problems. I have a picture of a pigeon up here because this is an example of an exotic problem. A friend of mine who teaches in Houston started the school year this year, and there was a nest of pigeons in the corner of his classroom. And every time he tried to discuss the novel that they were talking about, the pigeons would flap and squawk, and one of them would try and fly out the window, and the window wasn't open, and so the pigeon would slam against the window, and the kids would all turn around, and he got very little done for quite a while. That is what I would call an exotic problem. You should not enter the classroom having left your teacher training prepared to deal with that specific problem. You're not, it's non-repeating. But the classroom is full of the opposite, endemic problems, entirely predictable problems. You know when you enter the classroom, you're going to have some kids who want to check out and sit in the corner and not be bothered, and they want to just be left alone. And we know that we can't leave them alone for a month, for a week or a month or a year, because the price is too high. And so we have to have a solution to that. And we know that at some point in your classroom, you're going to ask a kid to do something, and that kid is going to talk back. I talked to a teacher the other day who said her first day of teaching, she walked into the classroom and she said, "Okay, boys and girls, sit down, please." And a boy looked at her and said, "You sit down." So we should, I don't know if we have real cultural and behavioral issues in many schools in the US. I don't know if it's the same here, but you have to be ready for that, right? If you get nervous and you think, "Oh my God, I never thought this would happen," you don't have a chance. And so one of the things about great teachers is that they have developed and problem-solved solutions to these predictable challenges and problems of the classroom. But we have them spread them out. So thousands and thousands and thousands of teachers walk into the classroom every year totally unprepared for problems that are predictable. And if they're going to give their lives and their hearts and their souls to the most important work in society, we really ought to be able to help them address those problems so that they can be thinking about math and literature and science and art and history, and not how am I going to get this kid to talk respectfully to me? Or how am I going to motivate this kid to learn? Or how can I phrase the question so that it's as rigorous as possible for every kid in my classroom? So here are some things you're probably wondering, tell me more about some of the things that you think you saw in high-performing teachers' classrooms. And so I thought I'd give you a couple of examples of things that stood out.
In a no opt-out classroom, a verbalized or unspoken "I don't know" is cause for action. Here's how it works. If you ask a question and a student begins by being unable or unwilling to answer, your goal is to end the exchange with the student giving the right answer, even if this means telling them the answer and having them repeat it back to you.
if I were in the 100,000th place, then how many times greater is the 1,000,000th place than the 100,000th place? Nora.
I don't know.
Okay. Alberto, how many times greater is the 1,000,000th place than the 100,000th place?
It's 10 times greater.
All right. Nor how many times greater is the 1,000,000th place than the 100,000th place?
10 times greater.
Very nice.
Once you feel comfortable with the concept of no opt-out, try asking questions to clarify the concept, giving cues that help to guide the student to the correct answer.
Okay, guys. Sometimes, always, and never. Right? Sometimes true, always true, never true. I want you to think about these number situations, okay? So when I read this card, I want you to tell me, is it sometimes true for this number set? Is it always true for this number set? Or is it never true for this number set? Okay, irrational numbers are square roots. Montel?
I don't know.
So let's define irrational numbers. What are irrational numbers? What have we talked about in our definitions in our notes? We've talked about irrational numbers. What do those numbers look like when we put them in decimal format? Okay.
It never terminates.
Never terminate. So it never stops. What else?
They're not repeating.
Okay. It doesn't repeat. It doesn't have a pattern. Let's come back to this. So we have they don't terminate, they never stop, and they never repeat. So square roots. Let's talk about square roots. What is a square root? Montel?
A square root is like, say you have 9, square root of 9 is 3, so.
Excellent. Square root of 9 is 3. That's a perfect square. If I have 9 tiles, I can make a perfect square on my desktop. Yes? Okay, so let's go back to the question. Irrational numbers are square roots. Sometimes true, always true, never true. Montel, what do you think?
Sometimes true.
Sometimes true. Can you back up your answer?
Because like, if you have like an irrational number, it can't be a fraction, but like the square root of a number can be a fraction. Like how it says the square root of 9 is 3. 3 can be a fraction, and so sometimes true is my answer.
Very good.
You can always enhance the rigor of the no opt-out strategy by asking an explanation for why after the correct answer is given. Finally, no opt-out can sometimes feel a little uncomfortable for both students and teachers. However, when the strategy is deployed consistently and unilaterally across an entire campus or district, it begins to create a culture of excellence.